So we elected a Democratic president, but a Republican legislature. David Daley breaks it down. Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. On the line with us is David Daley. He's the author of Rat Effed, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. Former editor-in-chief at Salon. His work has been published in The New Yorker, The Guardian, Slate, and The New York Times. His most recent piece was for The New Republic. His Twitter handle, Dave Daley and the number 3. Dave, welcome back to the program. Give us an overview or a quick primer on how the Republicans have managed to basically control or control as much of the House of Representatives as they do. Why is it that a state, for example, Wisconsin, that the majority of the people who voted for a member of the House of Representatives voted for a Democrat, and yet the majority of their congressional delegation is Republican? It's the same thing in Pennsylvania, many other states. How did that come about?
It's a great question, and I don't think you can understand our politics today without getting the answer to it. After the last time a Democrat was first elected to the White House, knocking out a Republicans strategized, and they said, how can we have a path back to power? And they settled on...
You're talking 2008.
Because this was 2008. This is 2008. Barack Obama is elected president. Republicans say, okay, that's a historic election, sure, but the election in 2010 could mean more because we're going to redistrict everything in America after the census in 2010. So if we can win control of state legislatures in all of these swing states, we can have the pens in our hands when it comes time to draw these lines. Republicans drew the lines in Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, and Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Ohio, and Florida, and Texas, Virginia, state after state. They focused down ballot. They won those state legislative chambers, and they drew lines that have held and given them these huge advantages for a decade.
And this is because the Constitution requires every 10 years there's a census. This year was one of those every 10 years, a year that ends with 0. There was a census. Trump has pulled the plug on it a little early, my understanding. That census is going to determine how and where other states can continue this gerrymandering effort, this Republican gerrymandering effort. Not to say the Democrats don't do this, but the Republicans have turned this into a science, and they've got big money from the Koch network and other right-wing billionaires behind them doing this. How do you think that this is going to play out? Do you think that there's any chance that when Joe Biden comes into office, he will be able to get Congress to go along with basically rebooting the census and redoing it? Or is that not even desirable?
I don't think that is on the table, unfortunately. These lines are going to be drawn next year by state legislatures, largely. A handful of states use independent commissions to draw these districts. But Republicans had a really good election down ballot. Republicans kept control of all of these state legislatures in North Carolina, in Florida, in Ohio, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania. They are going to be in the catbird seat when it comes time to draw the state legislative districts and also the congressional districts, which means that Democrats are probably going to be coming out of this with a 6 or 7 seat advantage, a really thin advantage in the U.S. All of those districts are going to be redrawn largely by Republicans next year. It's going to give Republicans an extra advantage in the fight for the U.S. House in 2022.
So you think
there's going to be a handful of new...
I'm sorry, you think 2022 might even go Republican in the U.S. House?
Well, Democrats are going to have a 6 or 7 seat advantage, which is pretty thin to start with. The midterm election, when you have the White House, tends to be a difficult election. But on top of that, the maps are going to change. So Democrats were able to pick up a couple of seats in North Carolina, for example, last Tuesday night. Republicans in North Carolina are going to redraw all of those districts, and those seats might not look the way that they did. There's going to be 3 additional U.S. House seats coming in Texas after apportionment determines how many congressional seats every state gets. Republicans are going to have complete control of drawing those. So even if you start just with those handful of seats, you are pretty much looking at a jump ball in 2022. It could well be
this is like
a speaker
permanent minority rule.
McCarthy.
So, David Daley, how do Democrats respond to this? What can we do about this?
We have got to have comprehensive democracy reform at every single level. So if that's what we want, the first step for this is winning these two runoff elections in Georgia, which will make the difference between absolute gridlock in the Senate and Mitch McConnell having a veto power over any agenda that Joe Biden and progressives are interested in working through Congress. That is absolutely on the line in January in Georgia. And then we need to understand that this minority rule has been deeply entrenched into the system through redistricting, through the courts, through the evisceration of the Voting Rights Act, and we have got to pass H.R. 1 for starters, which includes a robust protections and independent commissions for redistricting. We've got to pass a fix of the Voting Rights Act and get preclearance back in there, which is what the Supreme Court gutted back in 2013 in Shelby County versus Holder. It gave Georgia and Alabama and Texas and North Carolina, all of these states that had a history of racist prejudice in their voting laws, it gave them all the opportunity to go ahead and do whatever they wanted. They had to go to a court or the Department of Justice in Washington if they were going to make any changes to their voting laws. And as soon as that provision was gutted, it was off to the races.
Oh, I know, and we've talked about that at some length here. How does federal law change how states gerrymander, how they do redistricting? That's entirely up to the states, is it not?
At this point, it is. However, under the Elections Clause, Congress could mandate that states use an independent commission to draw these lines.
Really?
We could certainly have. Oh, absolutely. This has been left up to states, but there is nothing in the Constitution that mandates that states ought to have that power. And states have abused that power for decades. And you're absolutely right. Both sides have done it, but
for centuries,
so much more.
Both parties have abused this power.
Absolutely. Dating back to the founding of the country. I mean, Patrick Henry trying to gerrymander lines in Virginia to keep James Madison out of power. But the big data and the sophisticated map-making software and just the granularity of it all right now, they're able to draw lines up and down streets that pluck in exactly who they want in these districts and who they don't, and it has resegregated our politics in a dangerous way.